Before I begin, I need to warn people that this is a really dark topic and the things I've uncovered were difficult for me to deal with, so I can only reasonably expect them to be difficult for you too. It's also worth mentioning that unless I state otherwise, I'm going to be using fictional names and usernames. Okay, so for me, this whole thing started just before Christmas. As regular viewers know, I run a few teams who develop software that helps people write music. And in order to make sure that our software is working as expected, we're always on the lookout for music people write using our tools. So recently, a friend I work with stumbled across a composer I'm going to call Bobby C, who'd been sharing music on YouTube that he'd made using our software. And as my friend looked through Bobby C's work, he discovered a really unnerving upload that had come out just the day before titled My Final Piece. My friend also noticed another upload which came out at the same time. It was a final goodbye from Bobby C to all his subscribers. He thanked them for all the kind words they'd said about his music, thanked them for subscribing to him, and then very matter-of-factly announced that he was ending his life and that was it. My friend was very alarmed by this. These two videos weren't yet 24 hours old by the time he'd found them, so he acted quickly, trying to track down Bobby C on social media to find a way to get a message to him. He then sent me a message to let me know what was happening. So after some searching, my friend eventually tracked down a post under a different alias on a forum that was dedicated to the subject of suicide. This post was only a few hours old. It was titled, I'm Ready to Do It. In the post, the user identified himself as Bobby C and then described the method he was going to use to end his life. In response to this post were a few replies bidding him farewell and complimenting him on his bravery. Now, as you can imagine, this got my friend into quite a panic. He began frantically searching to find out more information. Eventually, we discovered what country he was from, and with a little bit more work, discovered his real name too. We passed this information to local authorities, but unfortunately it was too late. We got confirmation that Bobby C, who was actually a young teenager, had ended his life in an incredibly shocking way. We were obviously really distraught by this. For us, it happened over the matter of a few hours, and we didn't know how to process it. Anyway, a little later, after we'd received confirmation of his passing, I went for a walk with my kids to a local park, and a thought began to nag me. Bobby C. You know what? I think I know that name. So when I got back home, I searched for him on various social media channels and immediately he popped up. Turns out he followed me in quite a few different places. He'd commented on a few of my posts and had been a reasonably active member of my Discord server, which is a place where people largely discuss music. He was interested in composing more than anything else. He'd helped other composers with their pieces and showcased his music one time on one of our listening sessions. Like me, he was a fan of chess, and he seemed to have a pretty solid knowledge of the standard openings. He also took part in some of the sillier activities too, like submitting fun images of really janky-looking musical toys he'd found in his local store. He found it funny one time when I referred to my kids as janklings because one night they just wouldn't go to sleep. Looking back over his messages, he just seemed like a really fun, sweet kid. And with more digging, we got a better glimpse into his life. We found out more about his hobbies and academic achievements. We found out about his school, as well as the wider community he was active in. Seeing the impact his death had on that community was just horrible. There's no other word for it. Now, there was another reason I did so much digging into his activity on my Discord, which is that I wanted to see whether he'd ever hinted at his intentions to anyone there. Turns out, no. Nothing. Not once did he say anything even remotely pessimistic. He encouraged other users with their music and took part in all the goofiness that goes on. So I felt like some relief that we didn't miss anything. He'd never said a word about his problems to us, but then I began to wonder why. Why did he tell this other group instead? And that's when I began to take a closer look at the forum I mentioned earlier, the place where he posted his final farewell. Now, guidelines for media reporting on this subject strongly discourages naming this site directly. For this reason, I'm going to call the site Sorrow Solution, or SS for short.
Well, I was put in touch with someone from the AFSP, which is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. This was early back in 2020. And I asked her, did you get a chance to look at this? And she said, I can't even look at it. It's so bad. I can't even look at it. And so
this is Kelly. She got in contact with me after reading some objections I posted on the SS forum. Her son took his own life after being coached by this site in 2020. Since then, she's been campaigning in the US to have it shut down. How have you and your family coped, given that you know about this forum and you know that this forum was involved?
I mean, it's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. And it's something that, is my family doesn't want me to do because obviously it's very unhealthy. It's, when you're staring at a suicide website for 12 to 18 hours a day, trying to get information, for the New York Times, trying to put the pieces together and trying to figure out who is who, what is going on, who is involved, and while you're trying to grieve and wrap your head around, the loss of your child that you will never see again. It's horrific. There really are no words to describe what it's done.
Kelly introduced me to other parents whose children have also taken their lives after exposure to SS, and who are now also campaigning in their own countries. It was learning about their difficulties in raising awareness about this site and in getting it shut down that convinced me to become involved. We'll speak to some of these parents later, as well as legislators in the UK and US. The purpose of this video is twofold. First, I want to draw people's attention to the criminal nature of this specific forum to warn them of its dangers. I guarantee you, if you've not encountered this place before, you won't believe how bad it actually is. Now, my second reason is to do something I've not really seen in any other media coverage. Since SS gets millions of page views a month, it had 10 million views in September 2022, it has a lot of users, and I want to address them directly. If you were a user of this site, I believe there are overwhelmingly strong reasons why you should leave it. I believe you are being used to contribute to a significant level of destruction you have not been informed about. So let's get started. The SS forum exclusively deals with matters relating to ending one's life. At first glance, it's a little tricky to find your bearings due to all the specialised jargon and abbreviations. For example, the act of bringing one's life to an end is referred to as CTB, which stands for either cease to breathe or, more popularly, catch the bus. So while trawling this site, you'll immediately be confronted with posts like preferred method of CTB or please help, want a CTB by name of method but worried about SI. SI stands for survival instinct, by the way. And when diving into these posts, the first thing you'll observe is just the absence of content moderation, despite the site's main rule. Do not encourage, suggest, manipulate, coerce, or help users carry out acts of any nature whatsoever, including CTB. Only provide factual information and emotional support to those who ask for it. This rule is a complete smokescreen. All you need to do is click on almost any post and you'll immediately find users blatantly breaking it. For example, in a post titled, I need to CTB tomorrow, the user says, please help me with the way out. My preferred method has a low success rate and I can't think of anything else. The first response to this is advice so specific and so graphic I couldn't possibly repeat it here. This is a standard example of daily conversation on this forum. The people who run this server also actively discourage advice that tells people to seek help. For example, on one thread, the poster announced that he was about to take his own life. One response to this was, if you change your mind, call help ASAP. However, the person who said this was then chastised by another user who replied, why would you say that here? This last comment was then liked by the site administrator, by the way. Their most important policy relates to age. The site states that you must be 18 or over to sign up. Their method of enforcing this? A tick box that you have to check to verify that you are actually 18. No protections of any kind. There are a few more examples of policies like this, some of which I'm going to go through later. But what's important to note now is that they're not enforced in any meaningful way. I later learned that most of them were actually added not too long ago when the site began coming under more scrutiny. So it's an ass covering exercise. Earlier iterations of this site were much more blatant. And this led me to wonder, if you peel away the veneer, what's the actual belief system underpinning this site? And that's when I began to uncover a hole so deep and so toxic it just beggars belief. Let's start with the site's real philosophy. In a prominent sticky thread at the top of the forum page, there's a list of 4 philosophies that the admins describe as being adjacent to theirs. This is key to understanding their mindset. There's, drumroll, nihilism, which they reductively summarize as a philosophy that views all life as meaningless. We'll just leave that one as is. The second philosophy is antinatalism, which they describe as a philosophy that assigns negative value to existence because existence is imposed upon the individual without their consent. Now, in recent years, this particular idea has gained traction on various forums. I don't want to get diverted by the subculture too much. Whatever its origins, its main idea now amounts to a serious resentment of one's parents because they're the ones who put you on this planet, and they did that to satisfy their own selfish requirements to have children. Here's an example of how this idea manifests in conversations on the forum. In one thread, a user describes how he's worried about the pain he'd cause his mother if he took his own life, to which another user replies, I'm always curious how people who want to CTB can still love their mother so much. After all, they used you as a meat shield for their own good. The third philosophy is pro-mortalism, described as a philosophy that assigns a positive value to death. Now, this one is so stupid, it's tempting to skip over, but it's actually really important. It underpins an attitude that you encounter on the forum constantly. The idea that life is so horrible, it's immoral to act in any way that might dissuade someone from ending their life. In practice, it's used constantly to chastise those who recommend therapy or to suggest that there might be a reason to live. In fact, on this forum, suggesting there's a reason to live is about the most gauche thing you could possibly say. And last, and least, libertarianism. The belief that the individual is the owner of their own body and has the right to dispose of it however they see fit. Wouldn't be my go-to summary of libertarianism. There's obviously some kind of personal freedom connection being made here for those who might already be in that headspace. I don't know. Feels a bit tacked on. Now, along with this is the forum's attitude towards all mental health and recovery services. In a nutshell, if you're thinking of ending your life, the predominant opinion on the forum is that you should not speak to anyone about your thoughts, because if you do, they're going to lock you up in a psych ward. This isn't directly expressed in the site's official link to recovery options, where at least they provide a few hotline numbers, as well as zany pseudoscience alternatives like microdosing LSD and MDMA-assisted therapy. No, if you want to get a sense of what the admins approve of, just look at their moderation, what they permit, and what many of the most prolific members say. For example, when one user posted, "I learned long ago there's absolutely no point in talking to people. Doctors, psychiatrists, family, friends, it doesn't matter. They never listen. They seem to prefer taking others hostage over respecting someone's decision to CTB." In response to this, one of the most prolific members, who's posted over 16,000 messages on this site, responded, "I agree with this. People will never be able to understand as they're not in a similar situation, and if you open up about your suffering, it's likely you will just get invalidated in some way." Now we'll get back to this member, who I'll refer to as Cake123, later. It really only takes a few minutes of viewing various posts and their responses for you to become exposed to this anti-help perspective, and only a few hours more for it to become crystallized in your mind. I understood it perfectly well before I discovered their four adjacent philosophies. So, are all the members of the site like this? No. There are some who strongly disagree with this mindset, some who do call it toxic. The moderator's response to this criticism is nearly always to emphasize that free speech is of greater importance. The free speech argument is, again, another smokescreen. It allows the moderators to promote and encourage seriously dangerous conversations while quietly banning those who protest too much.
I need to CTB, but I don't have a method. Method A is just unavailable. I've tried so hard with it, but it's never worked out. Method B, Method C, and Method D are all unbelievably difficult to get your hands on. Everything is too painful, slow, or unreliable. This isn't fair. I truly hate it here. If you really want to leave this world, the method will find you, and you will not fail. Try Method E, all you need. And then this is followed with instructions and a video to give more concrete specifics. Free speech indeed. Free speech that directly contradicts the supposed core policy of not suggesting, helping, or encouraging. This is what SS actually is. And this pretense of valuing free speech above all else is persuasive to many on the forum. But what a lot of them don't realise is that regardless of their views, they're participating in a percentage game. As I mentioned, the site gets millions of page views a month, and of those who sign up, a significant portion are clearly attracted to the most extreme ideas. That's the problem. The fact that some members have the freedom to call these ideas toxic without getting banned doesn't make that problem any better. The stakes are just too high. When a minor is assisted in ending their life on the forum, that's not the unfortunate price of free speech, that's a catastrophic moderation failure. Now, the death of Bobby C is a perfect example of this failure. You see, months before he died, he had been planning how he was going to end his life with the help of others on the site. First, let me show you how the scaremongering and blatant misinformation about seeking help influenced his thinking. What are the consequences of failing to CTB? I don't have a therapist or anything like that. I'm considered normal by most people. However, I absolutely do not want to risk hospitalization if I fail. I'm scared to reach out to any therapist or help service in case they force me into a hospital because they'll completely prevent my attempts to CTB. Now, this is the reddest of red flags because he's just admitted that he's never sought help ever. But the first response? Your biggest consequence is going to be either permanent damage or hospitalization. Both can be avoided with enough research and planning. There is at least one message that advises caution. If there's a part of you that wants to get help, seek it. Don't make a permanent decision if you're not entirely sure. There are people who you can talk to who won't automatically hospitalize you. However, the person who said this then felt it pertinent to balance this statement by describing how terrible and uncaring the mental health services in their country are. And that there was the sole instance where someone suggested to Bobby C that he might reconsider his plans. It had been mentioned once, and once was enough. The rest of the comments are all encouragement, along with a large dose of anti-therapy and anti-help dogma. Unfortunately, Bobby C was much more convinced by the suggestion that he should plan properly. So he did. There's a whole other thread where he, assisted by a few others, assessed the best approach he should take to carrying through his chosen method. Again, I'm not going to detail the method he used. The only thing I'll say is that I found it unbelievably shocking due to how violent it was. It has honestly stuck with me ever since. The reaction on the forum was more like admiration. As one commenter put it, "You got balls to choose this method." For me, the most upsetting thing about this site are the goodbye threads. The first page I ever saw, the one by Bobby C, was a goodbye thread. As you can imagine, goodbye threads are posted by users who are ready to carry through their final plans. They're avoided by many people on the site who find them too upsetting. What's particularly notable about them is that you don't often see anyone make an appeal for the original poster to reconsider. They're called goodbye threads for a reason, because, in the logic of this community, the point of no return has been well and truly passed. And on every one of these threads, every single one that I've read, the same prolific toxic member I mentioned earlier, Cake123, will respond with a variation on this line. "Farewell. I hope you find the freedom from your suffering that you wish for." Now, it's not hard to see how all of this could be described as a cult. There are 3 telltale signs. First, it has a highly peculiar alternative ideology which runs contrary to mainstream thinking. In particular, that inversion of morality I spoke about earlier, that you shouldn't stand in the way of someone dying. Second, a ridiculous hostility to mental health professionals and the idea of treatment. You see this a lot with Scientology. Their ideology runs contrary to mainstream mental health treatment too, so they viciously attack it. It's Cult 101. Your ideology will seem stronger if you clobber all competing ways of thinking. Third, and most telling for cults, including Scientology, cutting people off from their support networks. Medical professionals and therapists, well, they only care about money, and they're going to lock you up if you tell them what you're thinking. Your parents? They're the ones who did this to you in the first place by selfishly dragging you into this meaningless world. You can't trust them. And those preventing you from harming yourself? They're assaulting your freedom to do what you want with your body. And in order to lock you in as much as possible, it's always assumed that if you register on the site, you must have exhausted all other options. I mean, why else would you be here? It would be immoral at this stage to stand in your way, right? As one forum member put it, it should be assumed that anyone posting a goodbye thread or asking for advice on a method has already considered their options to get better. We should give the individuals the benefit of the doubt in assuming that they made the best choice they believe they could have made. And just in case all of the above doesn't work, members are reminded on a daily basis. Life is terrible. Death is beautiful. And if you think I'm exaggerating in any way, here's a post by Cake123, who the admins actively protect and defend when other people on the forum complained about the toxic nature of their posts. "This is the truth. The fact is that a peaceful suicide would solve everything in life, and it would be the best outcome possible to pass away peacefully and be permanently free from this existence without having the ability to suffer and struggle in any way. Death is really the only solution when life itself is the problem. The fact that life exists is a cruel mistake, and it's wrong to value life in any way. And these false beliefs prevent others from achieving true peace, which can only be achieved by leaving this world." This person weighs in on just about every thread on the forum to actively encourage others to take their lives as quickly as possible. As I mentioned already, this person has over 16,000 posts. When one user asked for advice on whether they should spend a lot of time researching how to end their life in a painless way, or just get it over with, Cake123's response was, "I would personally just try to go for the most straightforward plan possible." And that leads me to the next inevitable question. How do we know this person isn't a psychopath? Some middle-aged dude who gets a kick out of being involved in as many young people's deaths as possible? How do we know this person isn't a card-carrying murderer? Because if there's one place I think might be likely to attract those kinds of people, it's this place. It's not hard to grab an anime character, say you're a young girl, and then tell people things like, "I agree with you, it'd be better if you die." And with that in mind, let me now introduce you to a section on the site called Partners, a listing of people all over the world looking to meet up with someone else in their country so they can do the deed together. People post the country they live in, the method they'd like to use, and anyone interested can send them a private message to work out the details. Only just a few weeks ago, a man named Craig McKinley was given a prison sentence in the High Court in Glasgow for using the partner section on SS to lure a woman over to his flat under the pretense of helping her to practice a suicide attempt. He choked her until she became unconscious and then sexually assaulted her, and then he did it again to a different woman. The other day, I found a post by a guy on the partner section who said he'd be willing to fly to you if you live in a country where a particular method is easy to achieve. Apparently, this would require some preparation. Quote, "We could search for a forest where we can test this method together." Something tells me only one person's coming out of that forest. Now, when considering everything I've said so far, one obvious question that pops up is, did the moderators do anything to protect vulnerable users? Let's dig into that for a moment. First, the site states that only those of sound mind will be allowed to join the forum. Now, the term sound mind is used to describe a person's ability to reasonably understand their surroundings and act rationally in their own interest. It's an important thing to determine in contentious legal situations, like when a person makes an unusual change to their will or when they refuse medical treatment. Did the person act in sound mind at that moment, or were their actions negatively influenced by something like coercion, bereavement, shock, extreme stress, psychosis, or other type of personal crisis? Second, on the forum's membership requirements section, it states that no one with intellectual disabilities can join either. Now, defining the term intellectual disability is a tiny bit problematic here because it's sometimes used way too broadly to refer to any kind of neurodivergence. I suspected the admins intended a much narrower definition to refer to those who are unable to function independently without care. However, I can't be sure, so let's put that to one side. What's important is that by placing this rule here, the moderators are trying to make it look like they're taking steps to turn away those who might be very prone to being manipulated by others on the forum. To give a famous example, in the state of Georgia in 2006, a man named Roberto Rocha, a 20-year-old who worked as a landscaper, was coerced by police into giving a false confession for murder. A murder, it was later revealed, he couldn't possibly have committed because he wasn't in the country at the time. Now, Roberto's comprehension skills were assessed to be at the same level as a 12-year-old's. The police extracted the confession by telling him they already knew he was guilty and that it was in his best interests to confess. He did protest at first, but eventually gave way due to the pressure. A person like Roberto has the communication skills to pass anonymously on this forum, no problem. But apart from disabilities that affect comprehension, there are all kinds of other vulnerable people out there. For example, those who suffer from a form of psychosis, like the condition currently defined as schizophrenia. A person with this condition, in the middle of a psychotic episode, might be highly susceptible to suggestion and encouragement during that episode. So let's now ask the question, does this forum take appropriate steps to protect those who are vulnerable to coercion? No. It's difficult to imagine a way they could fail any worse. I'll start with the bad, we'll move on to the appalling, and we'll finish with the catastrophic. Let's go back to the term sound mind. When treating a patient who says they've considered ending their life, a mental health professional will seek to determine whether or not the patient is experiencing a mental health crisis, which is a state of mind distinctly different to the norm for that person. There's a massively heightened danger of self-harm during a mental health crisis because to the person experiencing it, the future, or any possibility of a future, can get really obscured. Life can seem like a moment-to-moment existence, and recovery can seem impossible. As Professor Rory O'Connor, who leads the Suicidal Behaviour Research Laboratory at the University of Glasgow, puts it, people take their own lives when they can see no end to their pain, when they feel trapped by it, and that there is no way out. Like physical pain, there's only so much mental pain that we can withstand, and when we reach our limit, something has to give. Sadly, for too many people, it's life that gives. The thing is, once a mental health crisis is over, this view is nowhere near as black and white. To quote a representative at the Samaritans that I spoke to, a mental health crisis can feel very intense, but these feelings are treatable. Things change, feelings pass, things can get better. To quote Professor Rory O'Connor again, for most people, suicide risk is usually short-term and linked to a specific situation, often an interpersonal crisis. While suicidal thoughts may come back again for some people, the vast majority will make a full recovery. So, given the nature of a mental health crisis, where the ability to act in one's own self-interest can be temporarily impaired, this question of whether a user is acting in sound mind really is, for this forum, the question. This is something I want to put to those who are active on the SS forum now. How can you determine if someone is of sound mind, since all they have to do is tick a box saying they are when they register? How long does that tick box last? If someone ticks it once, is it still true 6 months later? Worse, how do you know that a person you've been speaking to for months, who's now saying they want to end their life, isn't someone who has an abundance of communication skills, but, unbeknownst to you, has a condition that makes them highly susceptible to suggestion? Someone who might find it difficult to critically assess a statement like, death is really the only solution when life itself is the problem, it's wrong to value life in any way. But all this can be put to one side because
I haven't yet got to the catastrophic. You see, the question of registration is immaterial because the conversations on SS are publicly available for everyone to see. And given that it has between 6 and 10 million page views a month, this raises an even bigger question for those active on the forum right now. How do you know that conversations on SS haven't directly led to the death of multiple people with intellectual disabilities, people experiencing a mental health crisis, people suffering some kind of psychosis, or minors, none of whom ever tried to sign up to the site because they didn't need to? You can't know. And this is the point that makes me confident that there's no justification on moral grounds to continue as an active member on SS. And if this makes you angry, that anger should be directed at the moderators of SS, because they've already weighed this up and they've decided it's fine as is. No one should be protected from this information. You deserve moderators with a baseline of rudimentary competence, but you didn't get that. They failed you in the most serious way imaginable. And to this point, just a month ago, a group of users opened up a new thread to plead on the forum to make it private. Some pointed out that this would protect minors, and those in crisis, and those who might act impulsively. The site admin's response? Not enough moderators to take care of the huge waves of new registrations that will occur as soon as we make the forum private. We have a lot of non-member guests here, and every time we make the forum private in the past, the registration queue would turn into 3-digit numbers very quickly. Cake123's response? People are already suffering enough without having to make an account on here. Everyone's got their priorities, I suppose. So I imagine at this point you're probably thinking, who runs this site and how has it not been shut down yet? Well, before I get to that, I need to first discuss the instruction threads, the part of the site that most obviously crosses the line into illegality in most countries. As you can imagine, these threads provide instructions on the various different ways that you can end your own life. They're very detailed, they're very clinical, and often very tough to read. Now, here I need to be careful. Guidelines on media reporting on this topic are very clear that it's dangerous to openly discuss methods and names of services because those in crisis may take that information and use it immediately without hearing anything else I have to say. For this reason, my description is going to have to be vague in places, but the substance of my point will remain intact. Let me map this out. When you first arrive on the forum, one of the first things you'll notice is how much the site and many of its members keep pushing a certain method. A method that is, to put it lightly, complicated to achieve. Now, after enough exposure to this particular type of conversation, you'll inevitably follow the breadcrumb trail to the relevant instruction thread that promises to show you how to accomplish this method. However, these instructions, unlike many of the others, are incomplete. In order to get access to the complete instructions, you're then directed to a different forum, which I'm going to call SS2, that requires a subscription of nearly $100 to join. Now, having worked in technology for a long time, and knowing a thing or two about social media, I've a pretty decent understanding of traffic funnels, and to me, this provides a potential alternative explanation as to why the SS forum has not been made private, because it would close off an enormous amount of traffic that would otherwise find its way to the SS2 subscription service. So, to put it mildly, I'd love some clarification from those who run both forums, both of whom will definitely see this video, about the exact nature of their relationship. Now, along with the instruction threads, SS also has a poorly concealed system for guiding you to sellers who can provide the highly advertised method I've been speaking about. It's one of the top topics of conversation. Here's a recent post I found of a user offering to provide a source to buy from. Names of specific sellers are described using acronyms. For example, I found an obscure archive where users discussed buying from A, which at that time apparently stood for Alejandro. Here's a screenshot of the site admin discussing Alejandro openly, which means the site admin is actively participating in helping users find sellers. What's also clear is that contact details for these sellers change constantly to stay ahead of the authorities. In a very recent forum post, one person asked, "Does anyone have the new email address for D?" It's then hinted obliquely that you shouldn't really mention the existence of these sources in public threads. There's actually a rule on the site that says it is against forum rules to post links to sources or to mention where you can find sources in the public forum. Well, that's interesting. There's a place where you can find sources? After creating a new profile on the site, I eventually found a guy who sold me the means for a specific method with 0 questions asked. I documented this entire process, but of course I can't show it here. The method I purchased, which is supposed to be restricted in the UK by the way, arrived at my door just as I was finishing up this video. It's weird that someone sent this to me and its purpose was to kill me. So someone in the world has actively assisted me in dying. And this is the first time that's ever happened. You know, it's really chilling and it feels incredibly weird and I got a weird feeling in my stomach.
looking at it.
So, who's responsible for setting up SS? Well, thankfully, in this case, we do have answers. In late 2021, the New York Times published an exposé on the forum titled Where the Despairing Log On and Learn Ways to Die by Megan Toohey and Gabriel Dance. You might recognise Megan Toohey as one of the two investigators who broke the story about the Harvey Weinstein scandal. There's a movie about her now. Anyway, in this exposé, the identities of the two people behind the site were revealed for the first time. The founder, who went by the nickname Marquise, was revealed to be a man named LaMarcus Small, who was 28 at the time the report came out. The co-founder, Serge, was revealed to be a man named Diego Galante, who was 29. The report also verified 45 deaths which they were able to directly link to the SS forum, 3 of whom were minors. And with Bobby C, I can now add a 4th to that list. In a subsequent article, the New York Times mentioned that they have linked dozens more deaths as well. We also know, due to an earlier BuzzFeed article with LaMarcus and Diego back when their identities weren't known, in a move I imagine they now regret, they admitted to being responsible for setting up a number of other forums for, wait for it, incels. I'm not going to name the forums here, but there are quite a few of them, and they get a lot of traffic. They offer young men a place for misogynist, racist, homophobic and anti-Semitic venting with a heavy dose of pseudo-scientific nonsense thrown in too. The main incel site is for raging about women. Another forum is for those who are unemployed. Then there's a body image forum where guys post shots of themselves so other guys can comment on whether they'd be likely to attract a girl or not. All handled in an unhelpful and very toxic way, with a funnel for the most despairing that leads straight to SS. According to a report titled The Incelosphere by the Center for Countering Digital Hate, this network has been linked to at least one mass shooting too. It's also worth mentioning that LaMarcus and Diego both identify as incels. With the exception of SS, all these forums are exclusively for men. So if you're a woman currently on the SS forum, I would take a moment to reflect on this fact. Of all the sites these guys set up, the only one to which you are admitted to join is the one that encourages you to kill yourself. So after the New York Times report came out, both Diego and LaMarcus announced that they were leaving the forum and handing it over to someone else instead. The new person is the admin I've been discussing this whole time. We don't yet know a lot about this person. It could just be Diego or LaMarcus using a different Proton Mail account. Who knows? So to the next question. How is this site still up? And why do search engines like Google still index it? Well, at present, neither are legally liable for their content. It's a protection afforded by Section 230 of Title 47 of the United States Code, which shields platforms like Google or Facebook or any other site for being held liable for the content published by their users. It's a very important law, and many argue vital to the ability of the internet to function as we know it today. Trying to discuss the pros and cons of Section 230 here would take us way too far from the main point of this video. Suffice it to say that amending it is, in practical terms, incredibly difficult, and doing so would not be without negative consequences. However, expect to be hearing a lot about this over the coming year, since there are already 2 cases being considered by the Supreme Court right now that revolve around Section 230. And there are more coming after that. I've put some useful links in the description for those who want to learn more. Anyway, although it's not illegal for Google to index SS, that's not to say they won't bow to pressure from their users. Us, as long as we shout loudly enough. I personally think Google, Microsoft and others should stop indexing this site and those like it, because by doing so, they're providing vulnerable people as well as minors with a direct link to instructions to end their own lives. Yes, legally they can, but they shouldn't. And there's increasing need for action. In the UK, among 15 to 19-year-olds, the rate of taking one's own life has sharply increased by 35% throughout 2020 and 2021. In the US, the overall rate has increased also by 35% since 1999, with 15 to 24-year-olds being at higher risk than any other age group. Now, given these stats and how SS is crossing the line in so many other ways, other attempts to halt its activities are emerging. It's not illegal in most places to encourage others to harm themselves. That, at present, broadly falls within the boundaries of free speech in the US and Europe, but in most countries, it is illegal to provide instructions and help. So with that in mind, in October 2022 in the US, a new bipartisan bill called the Stop Online Assisted Suicide Forums Act was introduced to the House of Representatives by Congresswoman Lori Trahan.
My name is Lori Trahan, and I represent Massachusetts 3rd Congressional District in the Congress.
What motivated you to introduce this bill?
We know that we're facing a mental health crisis in our nation. Suicide is dangerously on the rise, and we need to be meeting the mental health needs of our children. Far too many families have lost a child or a loved one because rather than help individuals, they push them towards self-harm instead.
The New York Times report, did that play a big part in making you aware of it?
Absolutely. I'll never forget the morning that I listened to The Daily, which is the New York Times podcast. That's what stopped me. I was getting ready for work that morning. I was in Washington, and I sat on my bed and I listened to the whole thing. I said, how could this be? And I just thought it was going to be, okay, folks don't know that this is happening. I'm going to write to the Department of Justice and I'm going to say, you need to shut this down. And then I was reminded that this is a complex legal territory that we're in. So it wasn't just so straightforward. But in the process of figuring out what our next move was, I talked to many of the moms and the families who had lost a loved one, which only emboldened my staff and me to continue the work and look at a legislative option, which is ultimately what we've introduced after 11 months.
I'm kind of curious, you mentioned that there's some, I guess, technicalities that are quite awkward to overcome. But how would the bill work and how can it be effective?
It'll finally make it a felony for anyone who uses communications like online forums to assist in another person's attempt to die by suicide. And most importantly, it gives the Department of Justice the authority it needs to pursue cases against suicide assistance forums. People's lives are at risk every day that passes with these sketchy websites that are operating in a legal gray area. And I'm committed to working with Representatives Katie Porter, Mike Carey, and Chris Stewart, who I introduced this legislation with, to get it passed as soon as possible.
Because the site is anonymous, and also because the people who are on the site, by the very nature of the topic, are very, very vulnerable and we know very, very young, it just seems like the perfect breeding ground for someone who's not giving advice, someone who's a malicious actor, someone who's there to do bad.
I think the unfortunate reality is that these malicious actors, they exist in real life and online. And what the forums uniquely do is give these individuals direct access to users who are in crisis. Often are young people who are experiencing some of the hardest battles in their lives and who desperately need help. But rather than offer assistance or direct them toward resources to get the care that they need, these bad actors encourage them to harm themselves and then assist them. That's the kind of behavior we need to get rid of. And that's the kind of authority we give the Department of Justice to hold these bad actors accountable. So this legislation isn't about trying to shut down forums focused on discussing suicide. I mean, there's real value in people being able to come together and share their stories. But what's dangerous is when people think that they're logging onto a forum that will be helpful to them, but instead find a forum focused on pushing them through material support to end their own lives. And that's what we need to end.
In 2020, in the UK, a young man named Joe Nihill took his own life aided by the forum. In the note he left behind, he specifically mentioned the forum and his belief that it should be closed down. Since then, his mother Catherine and sister-in-law Melanie, along with Angela Stevens, the mother of another victim in the UK, have been fighting for stronger legislation for years.
Joe was on there for 10 days. His first post was that he was feeling really down, told them about his past relationship. And they said, it's never going to get better. Yes, your life's basically not worth living anymore. They tell you that your parents are wrong. They tell you that the doctors are wrong. The mental health team are wrong. That once you get to feeling that low, that's it. Take your life, finish it. I suffer every day, and I know that the rest of my family suffer every day, and it just destroys you.
Brett told me that he was going on a short holiday. When he didn't return, I reported him missing. And the police told me that he'd been found in Scotland. Police Scotland got in touch with me and told me that he'd been on a suicide forum, and they actually mentioned the name of the site. So in the March of 2020, we went into lockdown. Because we knew as a family of this site, my youngest daughter, who was very, very close to Brett, she just couldn't come to terms with his death. And she actually went on to herself and purchased.
To prove that it could be done?
No.
Oh, okay.
To join her brother.
And you caught her?
She told one of her friends that she was feeling really low, and he actually contacted the police to do a welfare check. And when the police went to my daughter's house, she then admitted that she'd purchased this stuff. And we were all just an absolute wreck. We were a wreck.
I should mention, just as an aside, that because these women are taking a stand, the site admin on SS likes to goad them about the death of their children on social media.
You sent me some examples of, I felt, very, very abusive and incredibly heartless statements that they've made to you just because you've confronted them as well. I mean, I don't even know if I've seen half of it, but...
No, you've definitely not seen half of it. There's a lot.
Anyway, inspired by Catherine and Melanie, their local MP, Richard Bergen, presented a motion on the topic in 2020.
My name's Richard Bergen. I'm the Member of Parliament for Leeds East. Catherine and Melanie have run a really inspiring campaign to try and fulfil Joe's wishes, to try and ensure that people aren't exposed to that kind of dangerous online content, and so that what happened to Joe doesn't happen to other people.
Since then, after a lot of discussion, the present government in the UK has introduced the Online Safety Bill, broad new legislation which is currently working its way through Parliament right now. This is quite different legislation to that being introduced in the US. It's had a rough ride so far due to, again, concerns about safeguarding free speech, which led to some big changes in the proposal in 2022. The most contentious part, which has since been taken out of the bill, requires sites to remove content the government deemed to be harmful, even though that content isn't illegal.
It felt to a lot of us that the bill in relation to suicide-related online content was going in the right direction, but this new development of the government removing the legal but harmful clause is really a worrying step backwards, I have to say, for the bill.
However, in its place, the government included a new amendment that would make it illegal to encourage someone else to self-harm. And if that gets passed into law, that's a very big step.
I would imagine then that you would welcome the criminalisation of encouragement of self-harm, which I think was introduced recently, right?
Yes, so David Davis, the Conservative MP, brought a very helpful amendment to the bill, which I signed up to and which I supported, which criminalised the encouragement of serious self-harm, and is very important.
And just as I was finalising this video, on the 16th of January, a large backbench revolt in the Tory party succeeded in forcing the government to add a new provision that would make social media bosses face prison time if they fail to protect under-18s from damaging online content. The next step involves what will probably be a lengthy passage through the House of Lords. So this whole story is nowhere near over. There's a lot left to be uncovered, a lot left to be resolved, and we'll just have to see what happens over the coming months. Now, my focus is on what happened to Bobby C, and to try and use this example to raise awareness about how dangerous and manipulative those who run the SS forum are. My appeal is simple. If you're not on it, please never seek it out. It'll only do you harm. And if you are on it, please leave. The moderators have failed everyone who joined the site in good faith. They made the whole thing publicly available, including instructions on how to end your life. They chastised the voices of reason while encouraging their most toxic members. The incels who started it have ostensibly handed it over to people who are equally as toxic, stupid, uncaring, and unqualified as they were. It encourages isolation from your family and advises against seeking help. It has people who are empowered to tell you that life is meaningless. It is a perfect breeding ground for psychos and abusers. It actively discourages recovery. It has the blood of 4 minors, 4 that we know about, on its hands. Now, I should mention that there are users on the forum who are not toxic, who are just looking for a place where they can speak freely and feel listened to. And the reason they're on the site is partly due to an unhelpful stigma surrounding this topic. People are very often ashamed to discuss feelings of wanting to end their own lives openly, which is a poor reflection on society as a whole. Now, to name one stigma mentioned by Professor Rory O'Connor, it's way too commonly derided as a selfish act, which in turn makes it far less likely that people will bring it up for fear of being chastised or shunned. Instead, he suggests, the act is way more likely to be carried out in a moment of desperation by those in crisis who can no longer withstand severe mental pain and who are unable to see beyond that pain at that moment. For those feeling hopeless, you should speak to a few people before making any other plans. Those who say otherwise are probably not acting in your real interest. Now, I've put a couple of links in the description below, but there may very easily be local options you can access with a quick search engine check, for example. And also remember that if for some reason you don't connect with one mental health specialist, this doesn't mean that seeking help is pointless. If one person doesn't succeed in helping you, someone else most likely can. And please don't go it alone. Recovery is possible, things can get better, and there are people in the world who do want the best for you. And if you're feeling like you're in crisis, there are experts who can at least provide you with a better sense of your options. Nothing bad will come from speaking to them. Again, see the links in the description. And to everyone else watching, I have a final thought. There really should be no reason a person has to seek out an anonymous forum to find comfort. There are things we can all do directly to combat this by applying small protocols of our own. Do we know people we suspect are in pain? Can we just give them a call and listen to them? Are there ways we can make the world a little nicer for them and for others? And can we be a little less aggressive when others do or say things we find irritating? Can we just cut people slack sometimes, because you never know, they could be having a tough time right now due to problems that we can't see. This is the harder road to take for sure, but it's also highly rewarding too. A report from the International Association for Suicide Prevention put it best. Every step closer can connect someone to life and the help they want. Sometimes those steps are big, but sometimes all it takes is a smile. That's everything I have to say. Thanks very much.